Serio. Steven Serio has arrived from Boston, Massachusetts just this morning. What's it like to see some of our handiwork over the years?
This is pretty good because everything in one place. You don't realize how impressive all these things are until you see them in a group and go, this really works now. This is a good thing. And looking at all these cars from the geek point of view, the business point of view is one thing, but the geek point of view, to study all of these and look at the history and look at all the little differences on the cars and all the war marks and all the little dings and dongs, and it's just great. It's just great to have come down today to really see, this amount of work that started well pre-COVID. I mean, this was what, November?
That was a while ago now.
November 19, December 19, because we were in German drinking that really bad wine.
Well, that was that one.
The Christmas
car.
Oh, sorry, this car.
Yeah,
no, I get my cars mixed up here. Yeah. So this was the car that was happily found that winter. Yeah. And is now almost ready to rock and roll with the engine being.
It is out of the car. That's why some of these cars have those tractor trailer wheels.
These are very nice.
The transmissions are out and the engines are out, and they're getting rebuilt and serviced. And first of all, welcome everyone to another edition of Road Scholars Insights. I'm here with one of my best friends and certainly dear friends in the industry, Steven Serio.
Glad to be here.
And why don't you tell us, the world might not know about his change in his life in the Bond Group. So what is the Bond Group?
Well, what it isn't, it doesn't have anything to do with James Bond, which is because of my old Aston Martin background. Everybody says, oh, so you named it the Bond Group after James Bond. It's like, no. Folks have heard me say this within the industry, but to the world, Bond Group has to do with a bond of friendship with about 7 guys that know where all the dead bodies are around the world. And if we ever step out of dealing with those 7 guys, with you being included, you can always depend on being lied to, cheated, disrespected, or really just let down, like we just were with our lovely folks in Barcelona that sold us out of a car that we agreed to buy. Yeah. So the minute you step out of dealing with your friends and that bond of friendship, things get a little dicey in the car world.
When you first told me about the Bond Group and the idea behind it, it really makes sense, and it's really about character and product and service, and it's not as easy as it looks, people, on social media. The collector car industry is so difficult, and particularly when you start to talk about blue chip level things like this,
it's a minefield.
It's a minefield.
And I'm coming up on 35 years of doing this, and there are this many people in the car world that one can trust, and I can name them, but they'll stay in the shadows for now.
Shadows.
Yeah, they'll stay.
They work for Spyder, not the real Bond Group.
Where's your evil ring, Doctor?
Wait, this is we're like referring as we walked in, but we're going to start over here in the corner. We have a special opportunity. We have these handmade. This is the beginning of Porsche.
Oh, this is the real beginning.
The real beginning. All these cars are the aluminum story, but really the Porsche story. And what better way to do it than in one of our fab shops? This is our second fab shop. And, handmade things in the area where we do a lot of the metal work and hand make restoring these things. So.
Well, what bowled me over the minute I walked in today, I immediately went back to, I think it was October of 2018, when I was at the Sound Nacht, the great sound night at the Porsche Museum. And it was an interesting evening, met a lot of interesting people, got a tour of the restoration facility. These cars weren't there. And the whole museum, I think they had a Gmünd that they had on loan, but they didn't have an America Road, so they certainly didn't have 4 or 5 50s of one kind or another. So you kind of go in here and go, wait a minute, I'm in Durham, North Carolina. I'm not in Stuttgart, I'm here. And this is, starting out with, oh, wow. I mean, this is the coolest thing. I mean, we all know the people that have them,
Yeah.
and
this is, of course, belongs to a pretty famous guy in the Porsche world, and here doing some special work to it. But this is chassis 50 of the 52 cars made, obviously known as Gmünd cars, Gmünd, Austria, and they made 11 more, as we all know, the 11 lightweight, super lightweights. So.
exactly.
The famous book. If you ever have a chance, I'd suggest buying the book, The Last 11. It's a great book about the 11 super lightweights done by Jacques Martins. Great book, great website too, the Registry of the Gmunds. It's a great resource.
But those weren't built at the original facility.
Correct.
So can you shed a little light on that for folks? I mean, I've read about it, I've forgotten about it, I've read about it again. I mean, these things were built, I mean, to say by hand is unkind to by hand.
Yes.
Every single one of these is so different, but those last 11 cars.
Well, they are so completely different. I mean, in the sense of, those were built as Porsche's interim to make a race car and going to Le Mans early on, and they turned these aluminum body cars. And everyone knows this is the real beginning of the Porsche story. After the war, 1948, in a little sawmill in Gmünd, Austria, building these cars by hand, and actually through mid-production, actually early series production, realizing they couldn't produce this goal of 50 plus of these, and so they actually offset these to other coach builders like Tatra and other coach builders. And I wasn't even aware of that until we restored Dr. Porsche's car, Hans Peter Porsche's chassis 45 so many years ago, back in 2011. The first time we showed at Pebble. And that's where we got nuance, and myself and a couple other colleagues traveled the world, and we looked at so many of these. And this is, of course, one of Jim Barrington's cars. This is back in the early Porsche collecting years when Jim Barrington, Kent Rawlson, Bill Jackson, all the really early prototype Porsche collectors here in the United States coveted these and understood what they really meant in the context of this is the beginning. And it always blows my mind when I walk into a Porsche collection and people are like, well, I have every supercar. I have a 918, I have a Carrera GT. And I'm like, that's great. And they want to go into all their paint to sample stuff, which is great. I love that stuff. But to me, this is obviously the beginning of the Porsche genetics and design language.
It's amazing to me if you look at the contemporaries from that period. Ferrari was just getting started. They weren't building anything that was even remotely this important with regard to aerodynamics. I mean, you can compare this, I suppose, to the original 166 Barchetta, which is a beautiful car, completely different animal. You look at Aston Martin, at that point it was the DB1, which were at best oddities until they started the production cars with the DB2s. So when you really catch this for what it's worth, not what it's worth, if you catch this in the genesis of the growth, the real root of Porsche, it's remarkable. You look at this and go, there was nothing like this in the period. And Tatra, 3 times bigger, air-cooled, interesting, but nowhere near as significant going forward as a production car, because they didn't go forward. And you certainly, in racing, you're looking at this and what it led to. So it's just nuts that this was done in period the way that it was.
Yeah, and you can see so much of Dr. Porsche's influence of the Volkswagen Beetle, the KDF Strength Through Joy program in the war effort, and a lot of what those lessons translated to this product, actually leading to the first Porsche production series. And this shape to me, it doesn't translate well in pictures, and when you see it in person, it is the fundamental basis of DNA for Porsche as a design language. And then, of course, the engine behind the transaxle, all that great stuff that we know as Porsche. But to see it in person, to drive one of these is such a unique experience. And the owner of this car, this is all over social media. Of course, he's driven it, and this is one of the best running Gmunds in the world. And all the nuanced differences, though, of all 52 chassis, 63 total, but even my father's car, chassis 17, which was one of the cars last finished in actual Gmünd, body welded, interior done, they are all so different in the rain gutters, the A-pillars. You know, these are hand-built cars, and it's just indicative of every chassis number has nuanced differences, and the build, it builds aspects in the details. So it's just so cool to see these actually hand-built by by Porsche in the beginning of the Porsche story.
Well, what's interesting too is I appreciate this with the paint on it, but we've seen collectors take the paint off and run the cars in bare metal.
Yeah.
And it is...
There's a certain famous guy that's done that.
Yeah, and I think there's a second one being done like that.
Yeah.
And I'd be hard-pressed not to do that to this car. It would be sacrilege in many ways because it's been known the way that it is for so long, and it is all over social media and in books, and I mean, it is everywhere. But I think if I were going to have it, I'd take the paint off.
Well, you know, one of the
it just really, it really tells the story.
And it does show you, you know, the aluminum had to be smuggled in from Switzerland when they built these, you know, and just the process they had to go through against all odds to build these cars. And it does show you what they were up against and just resources and time and energy. It's just amazing, these cars. And what I love about this car is this is a really well-documented, Chassis 50 is a wonderfully documented original car with an original body, which in the Gmünd world is unheard of because most of them have electrolysis, suffered from electrolysis damage. And when you open up all the panels, it has those hammer marks and just all the imperfection of something being hand-built under a timeline to sell it and to fund a business.
How many hours to do the body? Do you have any real stat on that? I mean, any real data?
There's misinformation, but you know, I think you can assume 500 hours for the bodies. In that context, if you look at what early years in Reuter and building those cars, this is something completely different.
Yeah, you have four guys, one working on each corner, banging away, trying to follow a buck.
And you got to remember, some of these later cars were shipped out. The pieces were built in 14 sections, and they actually shipped out the body pieces to be gas welded and put on chassis later in life. So there's a great picture we have in the metal shop over here of cars waiting to go to be finished, painted, and finished.
And I think you have to do to this, with any of these, you have to leave all the imperfections. I mean, over time, I know it was a popular thing.
Right.
To make them better than they were.
Yeah.
This car isn't like that. You know, if you're staring at this, you can see how asymmetrical it is. Right. You can just look at the hood itself, the way the bumper fits, the way the windshield is, the way the wipers sit. I mean, it's all just, it's almost like this hobgoblin of, we think we know where we're going.
Right.
And we'll get there. We'll get there with the next set of cars with the split windows, but this is going to be a little trial and error the whole way.
Well, and I think in today's world, you know, Concours restoration, when people introduce themselves as collectors, what does that really constitute? Because this is a linchpin for any collector. Like, you know, anything's the beginning and the end. It's the storyline. And, you know, I always consider the Gmünd, again, kind of a keystone for anybody who considers themselves or labels themselves as a collector. This is the beginning of the amazing story that we're all infatuated with Porsche. I mean, it's such a brand that promotes passion and collectability.
How many of these have you touched?
Quite a few at this point.
So yeah, I mean, you've gone through 10, 12% of the production?
Yeah, we've over the years, you know, stuff like you and I, we're sworn to secrecy and a lot of stuff we cannot talk about, and stuff we get to touch, but we've done at least 12% of the production, surviving production.
Yeah.
But again, it's just, in this room today, it's like gives me goosebumps.
Let's get the insurance premium checked on, please.
Yeah.
My God.
But the cool story is,
it leads to this.
Yeah, we get to leapfrog to, because we have the whole Porsche history of aluminum car production, or the early cars, and it's kind of neat to see from this. Max Hoffman convinces Porsche that he needs to build a production race car, and again, all the GIs are coming back from the war effort, and
What can they grab?
They're flushed with cash.
Can you imagine that? Can you imagine that story today? You think about how soldiers, whether you're talking about regular GIs all the way up the totem pole to people running a campaign, they probably couldn't imagine, well, I'm just going to go to Porsche and go buy a car and bring it back with me. Yeah, I've just got back from wherever they've served and done the right thing by their country. But these guys in the period were paid a fair wage and thought, I'm gonna really do something to treat myself after busting my ass for my country, and I'm gonna come back with a sports car that nobody's ever heard of. Yeah. So I wonder how many of these originally were in the hands of soldiers.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, over the years, and you've been in the business longer than I have, how many Cardexes, factory warranty cards, have you looked at? And they're always a lieutenant. They're usually
somebody up the food chain.
Yeah, they're not enlisted guys, but oftentimes officers and engineers, and that's the old cliche, about Porsche, is they attracted engineering-minded people. But so many of the Cardexes I've looked at over the years of special production cars or limited production cars are always guys in the military. And it was always a European delivery. Yeah. Or it was a special direct delivery to Max Hoffman in the States after the fact.
So how many of these are in red?
This is
it.
Yeah, this is fire red. This is, of course, a America Roadster, made famous because this was sold to John von Neumann, and his stepdaughter, Josie von Neumann, raced this car. And she competed in about 11 different races in this car. It's a well-documented car. This was another car that was in Bill Jackson's collection. This is a car we restored and showed in 2018
at Pebble.
At Pebble.
Yep.
And this was one of the more difficult restorations because we saved the original body. This is the not much material left on this aluminum. These, again, the quality of the aluminum was pretty porous. Not wonderful quality from that era. But this was more of the challenging restorations. Again, not over-restoring the car and really making sure that we save all the original body, which was challenged. But, this is their first interpretation of a production car that you could buy from Porsche. Of course, they made 16 aluminum bodied cars, one steel body.
One steel bodied car, yeah.
And this broke Hoyer. This put him in financial ruin because they took too long to build these. But again, in the context of Porsche history, we now go from the first production car now to their first production race car in twofold. You could drive this every day, take the windshield off, the bumpers off, and you had a competitive race car.
That's insane to think about somebody racing one of these.
Yeah. I've always loved these cars. They're unique. Again, these were built in kind of 3 different body series. And this is a second series car, and it has these really beautiful boat tail design on the back. But I love these cars. These were delivered at the 1500 hot motor, super at the time, with the Herth roller crank. A whopping 75 horsepower, but that was a big deal in 1952. And you can kind of see, if you put in that way of thinking context of from 1950, 4850 to now 52, and basically the body design, Erwin Commenda designed this. It's really fascinating. You can see some of the Jaguar influence, and that's what people say.
Well, yeah, sure. The windshield, I mean, it makes perfectly good sense where the XK120 was ripping everything up and was revolutionary for Jaguar at the time.
Right.
And because they had gone from, you really think about cars prior to that, and when the Jaguar 120 hit, the aerodynamic shape, the fact that it would go 120 miles an hour, it was gorgeous, considerably longer than this, probably slightly wider, not by much.
Right.
I don't fit in an XK120 because you have to kind of be,
right.
5'6" and Sterling Moss's size. Otherwise, you're holding the steering wheel like this. You're sitting upright in it. Now you make them a lot more comfortable and put bucket seats in them like this has.
Yeah.
And they're, you see them on tours. You see them still racing. Mm-hmm. You see the alloy cars being campaigned. But it's interesting to, this against the XK or, you know, now you're moving into the DB2 world with Aston. You're moving into the later 212s with Ferrari. It's an interesting juxtaposition. All of them have the bonnet straps.
Yes.
They did, which is fitting for this. Being a race car, being careful, doesn't kind of work when people stick them on 356s, in my humble opinion. But it certainly works with this. Did you ever think about taking the bumpers off, taking the windshield out, and showing it that way? Or?
You know, we did. Before we restored this car, we actually always showed the car with the bumpers off it and the windshield off it, and it actually has a very purposeful, because with the bumpers and the windshield on in the top, this is one of the most difficult tops we've ever done in the shop. 36 different sewn pieces, and it has this very cheap canvas, you know, basically German military material that they use. Very fragile, stretches, doesn't want to sew.
Yeah, you can make a backpack out of this.
it's a burlap backpack.
It's a canteen holder.
But yeah, it looked really cool. And then when we decided to do the car for Pebble, the way it was delivered, it had been repainted already, and it had gone through a previous restoration in Japan. And I don't know if you're ever familiar with restoration work from that part of the world. That's a different way to go about things. But
yeah, it's sure. I mean,
but you know, we've sold another one of these in years past, and these are kind of an interesting, you know, you look at the Gmünd and the America Roadster, and you can see Porsche feeling its way, Erwin Commenda, the design staff, refining and starting to build a design language here. And then when you see the evolution of where this goes to a 550, because you can see some inspiration in the front end going into the 550. You know, this is a little more exaggerated than your run-of-the-mill 52 Porsche.
No, in Porsche number 1, I mean, this has more, I think, feel towards the 550 than number 1, and certainly more, I always get it wrong. Who did the first open car?
Oh, Heinrich Sauter, the Sauter Special.
The Sauter Special.
Yeah. This
is, I think, you can see some similarity with the Sauter here, although the doors don't open the same way. And
yeah.
That you can kind of squint and look through some rose-colored glasses and go, all right, I get it. But you going from here to the next shape in the 550, I get it more. You know, I really get it more.
Well, you think about too, because we don't really remember this in historical context, but again, Heinrich Sauter and then Walter Glockler, you know, he's a distributor. He's building these kind of steel ladder, aluminum body things that predate the 550 and the Sauter. And Porsche had relationships with guys doing things outside of the factory. And it's a neat story. You know, here they work with Walter Glockler, and they put one of his cars on the show stand. And again, it predates, and you know, very architecturally, it's the similar DNA.
Sure.
But that's where a lot of the 550 came from, because it was a proven product. He was racing it, winning hill climbs, running road races.
Yeah.
In 51, 52, Walter Glockler's doing this. And it's kind of fascinating to see the evolution of this, a production-based race car, into Porsche's very first purebred competition car.
Well, and to your point, Germany, I don't think gets the same nod and good rap for their cottage industry the way you think of cottage industry, you think of the UK, and everything in the UK was done, you know, barn here, a small facility there, a brick building over here, and people were sort of like, oh yeah, there's this whole cottage industry in the UK. Right. There was a cottage industry in Germany.
Yeah.
But there was, it doesn't get looked at that way in history books, I don't think. I mean, you really think of, oh, the English countryside, you know, oh, it's all very charming and wonderful, and all these guys were working together. The Germans were doing the same thing. I mean, they really were, you know, bits and pieces from different engineering firms and different dealerships. And you realize, too, how basic. I mean, this is more, I can't help but think of an airplane versus an automobile here. You know, this is so light, and everything is all riveted together. What isn't, I mean, there isn't one superfluous thing in here.
But, we're so used to jumps in technology today, but again, you think about from 52 to 55 and the leaps and bounds that they've made from Gmünd, America Roadster, originally called the Type 540 Competition Sport Roadster, and then, of course, synonymous with Max Hoffman, who always said things need names, not number designations. Because technically, this is a 550 1500 RS. And then, Max called him a Spyder with a Y. He had all the Cristiglia and Seata Spyders running around. And Porsche really had to make leaps and bounds because they realized they were losing the 1100 class in competition to Oscar, and other people were stepping on.
The Italian cottage industry.
The Italian cottage industry. So, and it's just interesting, again, this project bankrupted Heuer, and now, the Spyder production is fascinating because the first 15 cars of the 90 built are prototypes, and they went through massive development in the first 15 cars.
Well, again, so many Italian firms, you think of Oscar, you think of Seata, Stangalini, all of those wonderful tiny firms, and the list probably goes on longer. It'd be a curious thing to look at the British list and the Italian list of all the companies that tried to do something like this that then just went by the wayside after building a run of a handful of cars. They just couldn't. They couldn't figure out. The engines had to get sourced from somewhere. Fiat, the great source for so many cars you see in the Mille Miglia with 1,100 engines, and they're all different bodies, and a lot of them are aerodynamically wonderful.
Yeah, sexy little things.
Yeah, they're great, but I can't imagine a 24-hour race, a 3-day race, a 1,000-kilometer, 1,000-mile race in something with 1,100 cc's wound out the entire time, and then you've got these things which are coming on as the giant killers.
From day one, the first two cars were raced. I mean, those first 7 550s are all used, and they went to all the iconic races, Nürburgring, Panamera, Mexico race.
Oh, sure.
I mean, like, you think about all the early races these cars did well in, and that's why they were called the giant killers. And this is chassis 73. This belonged brand new to a guy named Paul Sagan, who owned a dealership in upstate New York, and raced this as a dealer and as a racer. He predominantly on the East Coast. And in '56, he came second in the championship. He usually got podium every race he went to in this. And this is 60% of its original body work. And as you can see, we finished the aluminum work of this with the help of Mike Cleves and his shop in North Carolina. This is, again, focused on not over-restoring car. You can see the gas welds.
Sure.
And we will prime and paint this car like it is. So again, the gaps aren't perfect.
You're not going to mud it up?
We're not going to mud it up.
You're not going to put a layer of skim coat on this car?
But as you see,
get the bucket out and just layer everything?
Or just
make it nice and smooth?
Well, spray filler, just do polyester spray filler and spray it 5 times and sand it.
You think about this, and then you think about the other company from Stuttgart, that Mercedes-Benz was now getting into the SL era.
Right.
And the two big spaceships from the time, this and the 300 SL and the SLR.
Yeah.
Mercedes-Benz was kind of bringing the big cannon to the knife fight, but in many ways this was staying lockstep with it. I mean, it's...
And these things are rocket ships. I have to tell you, because I've driven chassis 90 with the owner, Rodrigo, on that car, and that's a car made famous on social media these days. But
and this is 89.
That's 89.
That's
so this is very
89,
special.
90.
We have a reunion. We have chassis 89 and 90 together. But, when you read the stories, and again, it's kind of all these things coming together fortuitously for Porsche. But, von Honstein, Hutschke von Honstein, coming into Porsche in 1950, he was like the Albert Neumeyer of Mercedes-Benz for Porsche. Like his suggestions, his relationship with Dr. Porsche and taking over motorsports as a one-man department and growing it and really pushing this initiative from this into we need a purebred car. And the old cliche that Ferrari made cars so they, could go racing. to sell race cars, and then Porsche is the opposite. They thought this would be a good marketing idea to build competition cars so they could sell their road cars. You know, so it's like two different philosophies, two different approaches. And,
it's crazy.
Yeah, but you know, these cars still give me goosebumps. This was when I was a kid and working in restoration shops. All I wanted to be was around a 550 Spyder. I mean, the allure, the James Dean, the context of iconic design language, you know.
Well, yeah, now you've got Ferrari moving into the Testarossa era cars. And you think about that, that's all the stuff we grew up with, slot cars and model race cars and everything that was like, wow. You take the, Aston was a little further down the line before they got to the DBR1, but this was sort of the DB3 era, and going into the DB3S era. You take the DB3S, you take this shape, and you take the TR, and you've got everything that's been imprinted in every kid's head from that period. And these, you think about it, but these were made in volume compared to those other cars.
Yeah, 90 of them.
These were made so many more.
70 plus customer cars. You think about that, their ability to produce a customer pure competition race car, 70 plus customer cars outside of their factory cars, that's pretty damn impressive in 1955, 56. And again, they started developing these in late 52. And you know, also their first competition were laying out, of course, the mythical 4-cam Type 547 engine, the Ernst Furman engine. And really all that attention went into the engine because the steel ladder frame design, as these developed, they had to design higher ladder frames inside because these often had the tendency to flex. Of course, these had oversteer tendencies, but the ladder frames would oftentimes crack because of the flex. And that was kind of a secondary thought because really so much attention was put on the engine, the first competition engine, that obviously the heart of this machine.
Well, when we were going through your engine shop today, I was asking Simon, because it was relayed to me from one of the Porsche Classic Restoration Centers in Europe this week, you know, when you're really talking about engines for these cars, if you're going to run them and you're going to do the Mille Miglia retrospective and then you're going to go vintage racing with it, you have to open them up regularly.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the part where it's one thing to have the car.
Right.
It's a whole nother level, a whole different league of running it, campaigning it, and then at the end of each season, we got to tear this down like they did back in the day.
Yep.
I mean, people think, well, I rebuilt it once, why can't I use it for 10 years?
Why can't I get 8,000 miles on it? It's like an RSR engine today, like racing on an RSR. Like,
no, because they went back to the factory right at the end of the season and they were all torn down and worked on again.
You know,
which
again,
is nuts. I mean, and folks just don't, you got to educate everybody into that mindset.
Yeah, and there's a paradigm shift. If you think about 25 years ago when I got in the industry, these were you know, you could buy the best 550 in the world for $1 million. Well, and I still think these are undervalued. They were undervalued then, and they're undervalued now compared to what you would pay for a competition Ferrari, aluminum bodied Ferrari. Think about that.
Well, I had one in '96 that was owned by a fellow by the name of Pete Kinsey, God rest his soul.
Oh, yeah.
He passed away, and Pete's blue car sat on my showroom floor for $300,000.
Oh, my God.
And I think we had it for a year. Yeah. And it was original matching numbers car, and I think he paid $200 for it. He owned it for a handful of years. We were asking $300, and he just took it back after a while and said, well, if nobody wants it, I'm happy to keep it.
Yeah.
You know, $300,000 in the mid-90s for a matching numbers car, and one of the 11 they made in blue.
Yeah.
It's remarkable. I mean, talk about a bargain then, because you were looking at DB4 GTs being about $250,000.
Right.
You were looking at, you know, SLs at the time being about the same money, maybe less, you know, $200 to $250.
Yeah.
On the way to 300.
Yeah.
And now you see the disparity in the marketplace with values, where these have just exploded because anybody who understands the history of Porsche and or art, I mean, you look at the original shape, and it's just, there's nothing like it. I mean, there really isn't.
Oh, it's such a sexy shape. And these production 550s, later by Windler, Coachmaker, that made these were kind of an improvement on the early cars that Porsche ran as factory cars at Le Mans. It's kind of a refinement, the extra ladder developments, chassis development, but also the shape development, because the first 15 prototypes were all over the map of experimenting with fender shapes.
Well, the one we just saw at Amelia Island, which was, I think, chassis 7,
yep,
with a much higher fender lines,
yeah,
and
metallic paint, and that was done at the factory. People always say 550s only came in silver, and you and I well know they came in white, they came in yellow, they came in blue, came in red. So there were some, and those early prototype cars, they did metallic. They were experimenting with metallic paint as well.
So is that why that car was so bright? So that was correct to that car, because I remember looking at it thinking, it's winning awards and everybody's fawning over it. So I'm getting a lesson here, because I had no idea that car should have been that. Yep. That vibrant sort of. Yeah.
Dave Maria did that car, and it's a great car. And a lot of research from Andrew Hopkins, who runs the 550.org or .com. It's a registry, and he's probably the world's leading expert in 550s. Really knows the cars well. He was part of the historian aspect of that car, but I love this. This car is different because Mr. Sagan took it and went to the factory. He didn't want to buy a brand new 550, and he turned this into a hill climb car. Of course, what makes these cars so wonderful in their handling, you got 48% weight bias in the front and 52 in the back. And with the mid-engine design,
it's almost like cheating.
It's almost like cheating
at the time.
But he drilled out this car for the race season in '57, so he about drilled out everything in the car to make it kind of like a hill climb car, put the shorter gas tank in it. And as we know, these different configurations, these cars could weigh anywhere from 1,300 pounds up to 1,400 pounds based on configuration of how they were spec'd.
I'd love to know how long you could run with the small fuel tank at speed, because that's more common in the RSKs that we've seen that were hill climb cars.
Yes.
And you're used to seeing the whole trunk here filled with a fuel tank.
Yeah.
And once you carve that fuel tank into about a third the size, they must have been coming in regularly.
The cool thing about this car, it's got that, let's attempt to do this. If you go ahead and do that. Do the honors, sir.
Oh yeah, here we are.
There you go. This has got that shortened.
Oh, this is a short tank as well.
Yeah, so it's got a hill climb tank. So that's pretty wild to see that. And you can see the weight they were saving by cutting half the tank out for a spare wheel.
Hey, you only paid for half a tank.
And again, the spare wheel, as we all know, a spare wheel was
sit in the back.
Sit in the back on top of the transmission, and here it was in the front. And so
even off the weight even more.
Yeah. So it's just fascinating to me. Again,
it's very cool.
I don't think we appreciate what they were doing at the factory and just how they could spec these differently based on customer needs or what customers were doing to their own cars to make them competitive. So let's move on to chassis 89.
Well, this is fun.
You tell the story here.
Yeah. Well, while we were hunting down, which was the chassis 906, the red car that was the Jochen Rindt car that we found was offered up in Austria. This car, so that goes back again to November 2019. We were meant to go from Austria outside of Vienna to Berlin to go inspect this car.
Yes, that's right.
Except that's when we found out about it. And found out about it probably in September of 19. And then through a series of legal complications and the sale of the car, we were told we had to wait. Yeah. So, which led to a second fantastic dinner in Vienna, if nothing else, that night, by the way.
That was an epic night.
It was on many levels.
Yeah.
But this car was being maintained and run and campaigned all over Europe, and was pretty well known. The Mille Miglia was pretty well known in the Tour Auto. It was being used.
Yep.
And it was a wonderful, legit car to chase.
Yep.
And we stuck with it.
Yeah, we did.
And it just got here a month ago, 2
Yeah.
months ago now.
Yeah.
So in going through the middle of 2021, you just got to stay on these things because there aren't many of them. And when you find out about one, you got to sink your teeth into it and just wait.
It's sink your teeth in and wait, and you had the perseverance to go through some of the legal quagmire to get this car. But you look at the provenance, the document, the report from Jochen Bader, who heads Porsche Classic in Germany. So many things that quantify a real chassis. As we know, these cars were raced and lived rough lives, and this was a special delivery car to John von Neumann, who,
Right.
being the second to last car, chassis 89, he ordered this whole special rear end of this car that was raced by Richie Ginther. So again, this is my favorite kind of car in the sense of not just being a 550 and how significant it is, but the new owner of this is going to use this for a few years and drive it, enjoy it, and then we're going to
As
go
he
through a
should.
restoration and we're going to make the car as it was delivered. And to me, that's very exciting. It's kind of a twofold experience for the new owner.
I love the Jesus bar that was built into the...
Yeah, do you like that? To the high frame? Yeah.
This is the hold on to your life as you're a passenger bar. Yeah, I get using it and I get restoring it back to what it was because it was so significant with the different tail on it.
Yeah.
I love it in white. It's a it's
I
gonna
love
be,
it in white, too.
It's
It
going to
looks
be
stunning in
restored
white.
back to silver to go back to be historically
Yeah.
correct. But
But it's one of the few 550s with that side louvers and the whole grill stuff.
like a
and
550A.
Yeah.
And it's got the extra triple grill.
Yeah.
It's got the triple grill on the
Yeah,
back.
looks like a radio Telefunken face.
No, this has gone to a good home. It's then going to be used by a good home, and I mean, what a just great thing to just jump into, needing relatively little work, compared to some of the projects we see and we get offered that haven't been completed, haven't been finished, or $100,000 away from having any gas in the car, or $200,000 or $250,000 away from being finished. This is one of those things. I think everybody was wonderfully surprised at the condition.
Are you surprised in the last 5 years since you and I started really working together closely on these level of cars that we're getting such, not buy-in from our clients, but they're using them? I think that's the most exciting part of the journey for me.
Well, it goes back to the event at Road Atlanta, and it goes back to you putting together the 4Cam Jam. I say this all the time. What's the point of trying to convince somebody to have one of these if they can't use it? And that really, Road Atlanta was that perfect storm of early cars like this, 356 base special cars, then you get into the 911 race purpose cars, then you get into the real heavy 906, 910. If you're going to have something, there's nothing wrong with having this and mounting it on the wall of your office if that's what you want to do with it. It's not what I would want to do with it. I mean,
Right.
but if you want to do that and you want to own a 910 and look at it, great.
Right.
I'd want to get in it and use it. So it's all about, and we've talked about this almost ad nauseum now, life experience.
Yeah.
What are you waiting for? So have this and drive it and then go, wow, I can't wait to do the next event with it.
Maybe that's the freedom of these older cars, these historic objects. It's we both have clients that buy the the newest thing, the greatest thing, and it's always kind of a, what is the word I'm trying to look for? But they don't use them, they don't drive them, and to me, you're leaving all that life experiential
Right.
activities on the table.
I mean, I've said it 100 times. I mean, you can't critique someone's reason to collect cars.
Right.
It makes you think, well, artwork is better on your walls and butterflies are better in those glass cases, and go collect dinosaur bones if you want to look at something.
Yeah.
I mean, I know somebody that does that, and that's fine. That's great. But if you're having something that can roll with an engine,
Yeah.
that can go quickly down the road, why not use it? Why not use it and have that experience? And we all know guys that, to your point, love having the new cars. And without naming names, you know, they'll get a new car, and then they'll do like this, and then they'll pull out a magnifying glass, and they'll start to look for imperfections in the new car.
Yeah.
I don't know. I personally don't see it, but if that's what makes you happy, that's fine.
Well,
you know, that's fine.
And to your point, when I look in this interior or any of these cars and I see these hammer marks on the firewall, rear firewall here, or even in the cross bracing on the bottom here, and those rivets, and to me, again, it harkens back to the reason we're alive, or the romance of being human and flawed. It's like these hand-built things, just, it turns me on. Like, how can it not?
Well, and I think a lot of the misconception isn't the right word, but the romance over the years, people have given these, they think these things are flawless from new. And
What?
what do you mean
What
it's
do
got
you
hammer
mean?
marks on it? What do you mean the paint wasn't?
That's a
you
great
know,
segue into this, Mr. Serio. This is it. Segue, continue to say.
Hey, you know, that was not scripted. That was a moment
That was
of,
a perfect organic.
if you want to see the real deal,
This is it.
well, you know, we were lucky enough to have sold another one of the real deal cars recently, and
we can't talk about that either.
we can't talk about that either, by, you know, a gentleman's agreement not to go into heavy detail, but 3 of these cars are considered to be the most original untouched cars. That was one. This is certainly even a level up from that.
Yeah. I would say this is the Halo original 550 in the world.
Yeah, it boggles me that this car changed hands really quickly twice.
Yeah.
6, 7 years ago, 5, 6 years ago.
Yeah.
And then ended up where it is now.
Yeah.
In a keeper's home, because it kind of fell through the cracks, I think. When the market was a little bit different, was a little bit softer, I suppose is the right word. But you could sell this car 5 times
When you think
today.
about the value of this now,
Yeah.
it's a crazy, and it's worth way more than $5 million, folks. And
Oh, way more.
we can you know, at least suggest that. But you know, again, this is an archaeological thing. It's a surviving object. That's, you know, the very last 550 of the 90 cars. This is chassis 90, and it has been preserved all these years through a handful of really attentive owners. And this is the archaeological thing that we look at as a restorer and as a Porsche community. This is kind of the gold standard, even like Gmund 50 over there for Gmünd cars, of looking like this car hasn't been fettled or messed with.
No, and you can just, the interior, the you know, if you take these seats out and you look at how the seats are constructed and how many pieces of vinyl were there, and how the seat frames, or the bottom of the seats actually, they don't have frames, were stamped with numbers. And you look at the firewall, which is trimmed, which is peculiar, and you've got the original latches here for the soft top, the jack, which is still sitting there in its little home. You know, if you destroy this car and you make that one the last one, that one will be more valuable.
That's great. That's
So
really,
the
that's really,
things that go through my head.
that's great.
No, if you could find, if we could sell nothing but cars in this condition, boy, would it be an easy job.
Oh, life would be easy.
It'd just be like
You know, but it's
Girl
funny-
Scouts selling cookies, and then tell you.
This really has found the perfect owner. You know, Rodrigo Salas, who owns this, who drove it at the last Fort Cam Jam. There's a video of me screaming in the passenger seat. It doesn't have seat belts. And
Why would it have seatbelts?
he's an accomplished race car driver, so well accomplished, and he drove this thing, you know, 8, 9 tenths, and it's absolutely mind-boggling when you're in one of these. And of course, we did a total mechanical reconditioning of it and kept all the patina, didn't change any of the original finishes. But this thing, these are rocket ships, and you don't appreciate them because no one drives them
That quickly.
That quickly.
Yeah.
And it was so satisfying to be in the car with them, but also terrifying. But you can see why these were giant killers.
So
You steered them with a throttle, you know. That's what's so exciting about them.
if you had to guess, projecting forward into the fall
Yep.
for the next event,
Right.
Yeah, you have any idea how many 4-cam or 550s rather, or you think will make it this time around?
To the event, we got
Yeah.
28 registered so far, so 28 4-cam cars.
But how many 550s?
We're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 so far.
Again, that's crazy.
Yeah, yeah. Actually being used on the track too, not, I think as we have been talking about with some of these events we've been doing with our clients and friends, it's not about, this is not Rennsport.
No.
They're not sitting in a tent and we're not racing them.
Nobody's going to get a trophy at the end of it for being quickest, and it isn't a competition.
But it's using them and the camaraderie of seeing these things go around and sharing them with each other. And, I remember in 1998 when my father took me out for the 50th anniversary of Porsche in Monterey. I bet you were there. I was a youngin'.
Yeah.
But I never forget when my dad and I were in the pits and we were aware of what a 550 was, but when as a 22-year-old kid, seeing one of these and hearing it and smelling the race field and all that stuff, it was like drugs.
It's
like
intoxicating.
Total intoxication. Yeah. So
I had that same experience in '89, a little differently, when Aston was the featured mark at Laguna Seca and all the old race cars were out.
Yeah.
And that's what gets you hooked. It absolutely, being around the people driving them, watching the guys work on them, watching things break, get fixed, back on the track. I think Sterling Moss had a bump that year in one of the DBRs. Even things like that, it's crazy to watch.
Yeah.
And it either bites you or it doesn't, and it's either a blessing or a curse depending how you look at it.
I was going to do anything I could. I was going to do anything I could, and that I wanted to be around these and work on these cars. That was my life's ambition and dream, and here we are.
Yeah,
and our friendship has turned into, like, you look around these cars in this room and some of the things we've accomplished off the radar in the last 3 years. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, that's the one downside of all of this. I can't stress it enough that it is a little bit of, it's a shame you can't go waving the flag for everything that we're selling. But if we did that, we wouldn't be able to have the clients that we have.
Yes.
So this is great.
Oh, you're so well spoken today, sir.
I'm lucid today. Nine shots of espresso, and getting me up at 10 minutes to 5 to get down here this morning would do it.
That's another perfect segue into, we can talk about that one.
We can talk about this.
Yes.
This has been talked about a little bit.
We did a video on this, of course, the Dusseldorf story of going to Dusseldorf, and
right.
This thing, can you believe it? I mean, how was this off the grid and off the radar for so long? And if this is the car for 550, chassis 90, this is the car in terms of originality
for the 550As.
550As.
This is 142?
140 chassis, 142.
Right.
Ran at Le Mans twice, put away after its second race. Of course, we have these tractor trailer wheels on the back.
This is a good look.
Isn't it? But we have the engine and transmission out. But
you should put wires on the front and leave these on the back.
I think, like you and I have talked about, the 550As, such a better car. This is a tube frame. So you go from the ladder frame to a tube frame. 40 pounds lighter in the tube, and then this body's lighter than the 550 body. So these were around 1,100 pounds, almost 1,200 pounds. So the overall car is much lighter than the 550. And again, because of the axle point, pivot points, they got them underneath the car, centered underneath the center line of the car. These are actually well-behaved cars. They don't have the oversteer tendencies of the 550. But
well, that is the rub with something being the original shape is, in a great many instances, the most beautiful. As you follow the evolution of the cars, the newer they get, you lose a little bit of the original DNA and the shape and the beauty of it, but you're gaining in the drivability.
Oh, yeah.
So you gain in this, you gain a little more in the RSK, which is personally my favorite of all the aluminum bodied cars. Then you gain it some more in the RS60 and the RS61s,
right.
Because if you're taller, you'll fit better in those cars. But you have to deal with, the upright windshield, which isn't as, that's why I was holding this. I was like, we're going to see this back on the car because this you don't want to, I'm sure we're not going to take that off, but I'd rather see that on the car just for the cleanliness of the line. Yeah, but this car, you know, running at Le Mans is
Twice.
it's very, very few 550As did that. And
So many of these were rebodied, and when you see the rebodied 550As, everyone gets the front proportions wrong.
they're mangled.
They're mangled.
Completely mangled.
We had two 550 experts come in recently because these haven't survived. Basically, the air cleaner chamber here for the, carbs, and how these are constructed. The rivets and the nasty gas welds. This is a piece of,
right.
so cool on these cars. And of course, different from the 550s, this whole tail comes off. There's no hinged. Again, weight savings there, and they realize that you could have these for carb adjustment and everything they needed to do here, and if they needed major surgery, the hinged clamshells of the 550s were a nuisance. Anyone who's actually worked on these at the track, it's not fun, but this is a much better application. Of course, this whole rear end comes off the car, but
It was easy to inspect when this was off.
yes.
That's one of
the best
bonuses.
story. Do you remember that day when you were in, we're in London, and one of our friends showed us a picture and said, do you guys know what this is?
Would you be interested in something like this? And it was all luck, serendipity. What is the line when chance meets opportunity? Is that right? Then that's good luck. I think that's.
Is that a coaching meme? Is that a life coach meme now?
Put that on a big poster in your house,
big poster.
above your desk. But yeah, this again, we went from wondering immediately who would want it to three folks in an afternoon who said, what is it exactly that you have?
Right.
And, it's gone to a great collection. And I think Ed, the owner,
He's going to use it.
he's going to use it. And he's going to use it at the 4Cam Jam. And he's going to, I dare say, it's going to be one of the jewels and one of the centerpieces there.
Well, I'm excited because after riding in this car and getting these two cars to run to this level, because this is 110 horsepower at 6,200 RPM, this final iteration of the Type 547. This is the last development of that motor, 135 horsepower at 1,000 more RPM at 7,200. That's a whole different animal, and much lighter, obviously, than the 550. So I cannot wait to ride with him and feel what this thing is going to be like. Because again, a unique situation in this room, and all the hard work you and I have done over the years of kind of seeing this early aluminum Porsche development history is pretty special.
And we did have an RSK here recently that went back to its owner on the West Coast, which is too bad because it would have filled the next slot going down because it was an original body, original engine, transmission, frame RSK.
Oh, that's survived.
That's a survivor by virtue of it having limited use as a race car in period, and then remarkably never having been damaged. So the folks that owned it early on took great care of it when driving, and that usually means, okay, maybe it didn't finish in the upper echelon and the most toughest of races, but now that it's survived, it's another template.
Yep.
And you guys just went through that car. You went through it pretty significantly for the owner, who it was time to have a little bit of service done to it. So did you find a steering wheel yet?
Yes, I have. I just like that one because it's so weird. Like,
Is that
you can take it off.
that's not attached to anything.
What? Yeah, look at that
hold
thing.
on. Oh,
You know,
it's a Cooper sort of logo in the middle there.
Yeah, that thing was added on at some point in its
like the
later retirement age.
The one thing that didn't last in the history of the car, which is typical because the original steering wheels were fragile and it probably got destroyed. It's somebody leaning on it the wrong way.
Yeah, that would have had a wood wheel, and it would have probably, like you said.
So with the racing, with running.
This has the Le Mans tank. You remember when you and I first saw this? I about fell over because it has the extended gas tank over here in the passenger department. I was like, oh, sweet Jesus, this is awesome.
But it's a shame there wasn't. The only thing that was missing from this was a driver's log of how many of those 36,500 kilometers were done in France at Le Mans.
Well, this has its Wendler tags up front, as you and I well know, which none of those survived in the cars. That seemed to be one of the first things, for whatever reason, that went missing on any of these cars.
Yeah, no, the car got banged in the nose and the tag went missing, and is probably sitting on some, some mechanic's box as he kept it as a novelty item.
Yeah. I've actually the 550As were always abstract to me, and now that I've spent time with this car and a couple other cars, I've really grown to, of course, it is such a better car from an engineering standpoint, and like you said, it just doesn't match the charm or presence of the 550s, but these are such a development car, and onwards to RSK, of course, the end of the aluminum series cars, but
well,
special time for Porsche. Of course, this is the model that won their first overall at the Targa de Floro in '56.
Which is helpful for the history.
It's helpful for this, not this car, but obviously this model.
No, but I mean the 550s, because of their shape and because of James Dean, all the movie cars, all the sort of fiberglass copies are of that car. They're not of this car.
Yes.
So it's had time to get into the zeitgeist, I think, of folks in the Porsche world, where it's like, oh, it's a 550. Well, yeah, the 550A shouldn't be overlooked.
Yeah. I'd rather have one. It's a debate. You and I talk about this with customers all the time, because they go, what's an RSK? And any time in the world, you can sometimes find an RSK for sale. It's not a very good one,
yeah,
but they come up for sale more often than a 550, and particularly a 550A.
Well, that's a whole nother funnel down conversation, because I think you and I were discussing this morning, there are 3, and if you consider one more on the West Coast, which has been for sale for quite a long time for the various reasons, there are 3 of these for sale right now that we can put our hands on. All 3 have been rebodied, and including the 4th one, which was rebodied. None of them have their original engines. None of them have one of them has an original transmission. And you think of the hard life that these have led, and you look here and you go, original body, frame, engine, transmission.
Yeah.
And you think,
that's crazy.
Okay, you start to funnel that down into how many cars survive like that,
yeah,
and there are very few.
Yeah.
Very, very few. And we're fortunate enough to have dealt in some of the really great ones, and now it's a conversation to have with folks who might be looking, if you're looking for one, as long as it's a correct engine, as long as it's a correct transmission and you know why it was changed out,
right,
that's perfectly acceptable.
Yeah.
If you're really looking for the top of the food chain thing without any exception, it's hard.
Oh, it's really hard.
It's very hard.
Matter of fact, I can only think of one individual in the world that has all the aluminum. People go down that mental game of, I have every RS starting from 2.7 up to the newest RS and all the derivatives, right? But there's one collector in the world that has, you think about this, from Gmünd, America Roadster, 550, 550A, RSK, RS60, and RS61. And to me, that's like, woo, that's next level stuff right there.
Says you live in Florida or New York most of the time, the one you're thinking of. Because I'm thinking.
Oh, and I forgot to mention Carrera A-Bar GTL. I mean, how could we leave the Porsche GTO of the aluminum car world out of the mix?
Well, you could have kept going, because we've massaged 3 of those cars out of the 20 into new homes.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
that's not terrible either. That's 15% of the production.
No.
So that's pretty good.
I think you've driven, us together have driven the Carrera A-Bar GTL, and it's one of the most compelling cars to drive. Like I always say, 904 is one of my father's favorite cars. My father just walked in the room, so we're going to bring him on camera in a minute. But it's such a modern driving car, and you think about that, to me, is the holy grail of all the aluminum cars. Obviously the rarity, but you get the benefit of Italian-made bodies and the German underpinnings of design and engineering, and it's just like this perfect nexus of everything. And it really is. If you look at, they only built 20 of those cars, and they won over 400 races. It is literally, and I've been saying this for years, it is the Porsche GTO of that generation.
No, that's absolutely correct. I mean, and you think about what that was competing against. Aston Martin had fallen off at that point because the Zagato was a beautiful car, the DB4 GT, but it was a failure as a race car, really, with 2 team cars. The GTO has its place in history because of its success. But even Jaguar at that time had gotten out of racing really after the D-Type.
Right.
And you could arguably say the lightweight E-types were
I like the
a
lightweight
contemporary. Yeah, that's a significant car as
That's
well.
a sexy
But
thing.
yeah, you're in that really upper echelon of
Right.
wow, and then you start to look at the American influence with Shelby at that point and
Yeah.
what he was going to do, with the Cobras against the Corvettes and bringing those into the group. But you look at the size and the impact, the beauty of the Abarth, that's that's just a downright bit of perfection.
Yeah. It's kind of,
good.
I mean, all these cars are end of an era. If you think about 65, 63, going into 65, and we get into the aeronautical, fiberglass era racing, particularly for Porsche, but all the manufacturers. So this is an end of the coach-built era, and now things are being designed in wind tunnels. And to me, this is one of my favorite parts of automotive history, and of course, automotive racing, but truly hand-built things done on blueprints, done by hand and built by hand. And it's just really the romance when you're around these things in person.
Yeah, no, you could sit in here and have dinner every night and just be perfectly content with your surroundings.
Yes. I keep trying to convince my father on the aluminum car and chassis 73. I would just have that in a room and drink bourbon around it every night. And
I'll be there. That's I'll drink bourbon instead of gin. That's fine.
Listening and learning.
Yeah. Oh, I bet.
Were you taking notes on everything we said that was wrong?
hope
I know I would.
I hope that the
Where are you going
folks-
to? Are you working today?
I work every day.
These are not your play
I work
clothes.
No, but I hope the audience that views this edited film will appreciate the lessons that you and Cam have shared here in terms of the significance of these cars, their place in history, not only with Porsche, but with motorsports overall. And last, but certainly not least, and I came late to this understanding, is that these cars still, what now, 70 plus years later in some cases, certainly 60 plus years later, are meant to be driven. And as someone who had the privilege to be a caretaker for a number of years, and I treasure the memories, but they sat more than they should. And today, because I'm not buying green bananas, I understand that I'm doing the car a favor
Yeah.
by exercising it. And I think the event, Steve, that you and Cam and the team have put together, the 4-Cam Jam, the Road Atlanta experience, and certainly the Peak to Peak experience with the 906s and more of that to come. I credit both of you and the team, but I also credit the owners, the other owners of these cars, who likewise, and some of them came to that understanding early, but we all now understand we owe it to the cars to exercise them.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. That's wonderfully said, because it's all about this at the end of the day. They'll all have new owners at some point, and the new caretakers, hopefully in another generation, before, while we're still able to buy fuel to use these things.
Exactly.
And that, I never thought of it. I mean, Cam's team has done 99% of the work on all of the events, and I've scratched the earth to find some of the cars to bring there.
It's a great partnership.
Yeah, it is.
It is a great partnership.
And that's been the lucky bit.
For all
So
of us.
I have to leave, and I have to, keep scratching the earth and try to find these things. And as we talked about this morning prior to stepping in here, that's the tough part right now. Because the more you're successful at promoting something, the less likely you are to pull it out of the owners.
Right.
And they all want to be a part of it now.
Absolutely.
I mean, and to sound really sort of snotty and glib about this for just a moment.
I love glib and smart.
If you don't have something with a 4-cam, you can't come to the 4-cam Jam. This is not a pitch to buy a 4-cam car, but if you want to be a part of the event, well, that's part of the experience. And, and with the trips in Colorado, if you don't have a plastic Porsche, if you don't have a fiberglass car, and you're not part of the, well, really less than 10 guys that are going to do the next one, it's an entree that, not everybody has a 904, a 906, a 908, or a 910, but that's the price of admission, because that's part of the club.
And I think doing those events, particularly an event like the Colorado experience, just for sheer ability to manage the experience so that it's enjoyable for the participants, you can't have a big group.
No.
It requires a tight, probably 4 to 6 cars because of the support team that really needs to be there to keep those cars in operating condition. And it's not arrogant. I think it's just the reality that these, one, there aren't that many to begin with.
Sure.
And two, of the few that are still available, some of them don't get used. So I think it's a credit, again, to the owners of these cars, the current caretakers, that they're willing, with the support of this team, to use these cars on the road.
I think also, to your point, Steve, what you just said about, we don't have a crystal ball about the future, but we know world regulation on fuel and how cars are used are going to change in our lifetime. And, private racetracks, private track clubs are becoming, the new rage. And where are these cars going to be? Because I'm not convinced that you're going to tell me, like, a 918 is an amazing thing and a footnote of Porsche history, but is it going to be as compelling in a room 40 years from now as this architecturally, as an archaeological object and part of Porsche history? It will be an important footnote, but I think as we define in the long-term future where is collecting going, and what does Porsche mean in 30 years? Where are they as a company? Probably flying cars, but all kidding aside, it's an interesting, because we've been talking for years, people that are scared, top-level collectors are very concerned about demographic changes, yet these keep proving to be,
They transcend.
They transcend generations.
They keep jumping generations because the guys who are successful now, and it's a new level of success in the world, a new level of liquidity.
Right.
The 70-year-old gentleman may be selling these to the 40-year-old guy.
Right.
He's not selling them to his peer in many instances, and the new generation of guy is going, well, I love my 918, or I love my Carrera GT, or I love my fill-in-the-blank Koenigsegg Pagani. Where are you going to drive the new Bugatti Pure Sport with all of that? Even on a track, if you hand the keys to someone, they're going to kill themselves. They're going to drive, even if you're driving it at 5/10. Yeah. And with these things, I'm not waving the flag for driving something slow quickly. Yeah. But it makes a pretty good argument.
It's more exciting to 9 out of 10 of us, to your point, Steve, to drive these cars at, say, 7 to 8/10 of their ability on a track or on a road under right conditions than it is to take a new supercar that none of us, other than pure racers, are ever going to get above 4 or 5/10 of its ability.
Right. God willing.
Yeah.
Very true.
And have a lawyer on call for the speeding ticket.
That is very true.
And I think, to your point about the 918, it will obviously be an important, as Cam said, point in Porsche's history because of its first hybrid status as a supercar. But I find even now early that if you said of the 3 late model supercars, the 959, the Carrera GT, and the 918, I have to say I get more enjoyment, and I'm a moving chicane, out of driving the 959 and the Carrera GT particularly than I do the 918. Yeah.
I get that.
Yeah.
Well, I'll take your 959S anytime you need somebody to drive.
And I thank you and Cam. I wouldn't have that car if it weren't for both of you.
Yeah.
And I'm proud to be its current caretaker. It's a wonderful car and a technological breakthrough in its day.
Yeah.
Well, I think, and not to go down a rabbit hole here, but road scholars can work on that car.
That's right.
And you can probably work on a Carrera GT if you had to.
Yeah.
The 918?
No, that's another.
You got to send it down to NASA or the.
Kick it down the road.
Change battery for me in an afternoon, sir.
Yeah.
Yep.
No, again, rabbit hole conversations, but I'm very passionate about mentoring other shops, and we don't have enough shops that can, even service carburetor 911s or, even the G series cars, in the 80s. So, I'm really, hopefully we continue to, there are other shops that come up and trying to help those shops get up to speed on, there's enough work, as I've said for many years, there's more work to go around than there are shops that can do it. So
That's sad but true.
Yeah.
So what's next? You're just off of Pikes Peak.
Yeah.
You had a whole 48 hours off this weekend, probably.
Yeah, I did. I had
and
Maybe not.
Maybe not. Well, Pebble Beach is next, as
Yeah.
we all know, and we're going to show a 904 there. It belongs to the Ingram collection, and we're showing, of course, our mutual friend Chuck Ray helping a collector there with a very significant car.
the Grifo prototype, the A3L.
Our first Italian type.
And in collaboration with Chuck's restoration team and your wonderful paint and body guys,
Yep.
I think
Stunning car.
that's going to be something.
Stunning.
Yeah. That's every once in a while you got to step outside
Steve,
the Porsche world and go,
Steve,
I'd have that as well.
I
you know.
had to keep my distance because I didn't want to drool all over while it was here. No, and then we have Indianapolis coming up with
Luft.
to Colt
Yeah.
and the Porsche experience there. And
Speed
then you have the
Festival.
Audrain show.
That's October as well.
And then our Colorado trip.
Big Colorado adventure.
So-
4-cam jam.
Yeah,
So-
and there's a really good new Concours that we went to in its inaugural year that we're going to try to do again in Chattanooga.
Yeah.
That's
Oh, when is
not-
that?
That's actually a good show. It's in October, November.
yeah.
I should have it memorized, but everyone's saying, you know, we're catching up on
And
COVID,
they
lost
combine-
COVID.
They combine a nice street Concours event with the actual driving experience.
A historic race as
yeah,
well.
Yeah.
What are we doing standing around? You
Well,
got a lot of work
gents-
to do.
Yeah.
Thanks for letting me butt in.
Yeah. Thanks for wandering in.
I think that's it. I think that concludes. I hope if you actually hung in this long, during this long diatribe of early Porsche aluminum history, but thank you for joining us. It's been an honor. Anytime I get to spend time with one of my best friends, Steven Serio, and he flew down today, made time to do this, but kind of a special day to have these collection of cars and be able to talk about them and what it means for Porsche history.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. I am happy to come down regularly to
Yes.
see what's happening and
Yes.
to check in. And this is one of those instances where, hey, if you can get down here and not love how you're spending the day, you should be doing something else. So, from my point of view, so, you got to go to work.
Yes.
I got to go goof off. You got to go. You got to go work.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.